Hello, everyone. It's Michelle Ann Titler on January 31st, 2025. One more day until February 1st. And Gerry Gagnon and I are here from End Race-Based Law in Canada. And today we're going to discuss Canadian race laws in the news. We're going to discuss Canada as the 51st state. And I found this really great logo online that says Maple MAGA, and I really like it. There are a lot of Canadians who just want us to be saved. And, maybe they like the Americans. I think that maybe the Albertans are a little, anyway, we're going to talk about that today because some people hate the idea. Some people love it. Some people are neutral. Some people are really emotional about it. So that's what Gerry and I are going to do today. We're going to talk about Canada, I guess, becoming a 51st state of the United States of America. So Gerry, say hello to everyone.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to 2025. I hope your year is doing better than the last one so far. Doesn't seem that way in a lot of respects, including our political scene at the moment. And of course, the topic of today is probably the topic all across Canada at this point, provoked by President Trump either trolling us in order to get a response, or seriously, I think it's half of both. I think he's seriously putting out an idea that Americans have had ever since Manifest Destiny back in the 1800s, when they believed it was their destiny to have the United States of North America, as it were.
Well, if I may just jump in here, Gerry, what we learned in Q Army and all through MAGA was that President Trump never just throw stuff out there as a joke or throwing it around. He's always, always serious. So when we saw that, we knew.
Well, and so, the most fascinating aspect of this to me, and we'll get to, I think we do need to talk about the implications for our subject, which is the Aboriginal issue and race laws in Canada. But first of all, there's the whole general picture. And what's been most surprising to me is having spent years in the past living back east in provinces like Ontario, where the anti-American sentiment is pretty strong to the point where I kept getting annoyed by it because it seemed so illogical to me. But having grown up with that, and I've lived all across Canada, I find it amazing that things have reached such a state in Canada now that Canadians are actually seriously discussing this. There is no time in my life that I can think of when this would have been treated as a serious
We're pretty
subject.
desperate. And may I ask you, when you say out east, because I know you've lived around because you were your father was a military guy and you were an army brat, although you're not a brat at all, you weren't a brat. Where are you talking about, way out east, or are you talking about Toronto?
Well, yeah, I've lived in New Brunswick. I spent a summer in Prince Edward Island 1 year with friends. My father's family are Quebecois, from the 1600s, so their roots are pretty deep. I've lived in Ottawa, Toronto, Windsor, London, Ontario. I've lived in Manitoba. My mother's family is from Saskatchewan. I've lived in Alberta, where my parents are buried, and I've lived in British Columbia. So I think I've been lucky in that sense. I don't think most Canadians have had this experience, especially throughout their lifetime, starting when they were a child. And so I've always had a sense of Canada as a nation. But I have noticed more and more as the years have gone by, each area more and more identifying itself regionally rather than as Canadians. The first thing they'll say is not I'm a Canadian, so I'm an Albertan, or I'm a Quebecer, or I'm a et cetera, right? And that's disturbed me for a long time. I've seen that as cracks in our psyche, never mind the actual structure of government or any of the flowery rhetoric, but the people's psyche. And now we see that in the fact that this can actually be treated as a serious subject, is Canada joining the United States without people losing their minds, which is what would have happened decades ago. Like, this would not have been tolerated as a discussion.
Gerry,
It just wouldn't have been.
I remember a time when I would go into a drugstore and buy Canadian magazines of some sort. Either
Hmm.
I liked some science magazines, political, whatever it may have been. And I was a teenager at a certain point, and then suddenly one day, like overnight, and it was something that did happen. So I guess the free trade thing, suddenly
Hmm.
they were just absolutely filled with American magazines, and that was really the beginning in my era, in my estimation, of when I recognized that suddenly we were being Americanized.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, and the thing now, as to the actual topic of us being the 51st state, structurally to me, I see issues with that. Number one, if we're not unified as a country, we're certainly not going to be unified as a state.
Mm.
And so it would make more sense if we're going to split up in effect. For instance, Quebec would definitely want to be its own state. They do not want to be part of a state with the rest of Canada if they can help it, because they're going to want special privilege, etc. Still for their language, etc. Right? Um, the Maritimes I can see joining as a bloc, although there again they have to overcome their provincial differences in order to be a bloc. And when you get to the west, it even gets tricky because there are states as small as, say, Manitoba in terms of population. So effectively, there could be 10 Canadian states join, and we'd have 61 or 60 American states instead of 50.
Well, Jerry, that's a good point. That's a really, really good point. And as they're doing now, they are handing a lot of, it's the United States of America, and they're handing, that's what Roe versus Wade was all about, was handing the
Mm-hmm.
decision back to the states. And that's, I
Mm-hmm.
know, a big part of MAGA and what they want to do. So
Well,
we
exactly.
may not lose everything. We may actually gain a lot more than we
Well,
realized.
what's busting up Confederation is the provinces fighting with the federal government over them having their own provincial controls over things, right? And so they're not going to want to join the US as one state where they now have no local controls anymore,
Well, and if I may, the big
right?
argument out west, especially for the Albertans, is they send all of their oil money to the east.
Mm-hmm.
The government and Quebec just steal it.
Well,
So
yeah,
they have legitimate,
yes.
like the West has legitimate arguments about all, like there, I've seen graphs on in social media, you know what that's like, where all the payments that go from from Western Canada to Eastern Canada
Mm-hmm.
alone is enough for
Mm-hmm.
so many Albertans to just want to separate.
No, there's no doubt about that. And see that again, though. Okay, here's the sticking point, if you will. Okay, let's say 7 provinces of Canada want to join the states and 3 don't. Now what happens? Like, does Quebec become an independent nation? Is the U.S. okay with Quebec
Well,
being
I
this?
foresee President Trump offering them just some kind of a deal. He has a way.
Well, I understand that, but America's having enough difficulties maintaining English as its national language with all of the Latinos, et cetera, coming into the country. And so allowing French, are they going to recognize French as a national language? No, there's no way.
But Jerry, I mean, here's the thing, that this is what you and I talked about. That's why we needed to do a video on this, because that would also, so we need to talk about what this would do to the race laws for the Aboriginals.
Mm-hmm.
They must be freaking out the most, and what it would do to the French laws, because they have the only real supremacy in Canada is truly French supremacy and Native supremacy.
But we also have, for instance, protections in our Constitution for the separate school system, the Catholic school system, that were put in at the founding of the country. Now, Americans don't have any religious protections for Catholic schools, et cetera, right? So um, that's why we have Catholic school boards across the country, because when there are enough Catholics in an area to require a Catholic school, they're allowed to form a Catholic school board under our Constitution. So there's lots of little, because Canada's been built on horse trading rather than principle. And I've said, if you compare the way the 2 constitutions were written, the American one was developed over a long period of time through debates and essays. Hamilton wrote the Federalist, and etc. Right? These guys had serious study and debate for years on how to build a country, what the Constitution needed to be, and they argued over all these different little points. In Canada, they got together for a week in Charlottetown, and because it was government run, we have all the paperwork, and it is almost impossible to believe that that number of people drank that amount of booze in 7 days. It's stunning. It's absolutely mind-boggling. I can only assume a lot of it was taken back home by these guys. It was actually stolen rather than drunk. But the point being, they sat around drinking till late in the night, drinking whiskey and horse trading and going, well, okay, we'll give you this privilege, but then we want this privilege, as opposed to settling on a set of principles that everyone would abide by. And so we have Francophone rights, we have Catholic school rights, we have Indian rights, etc. Right? And it's a mess, and it's
Yeah,
only
the
getting
only thing we
worse.
don't have, and it's the truth, is just regular people, everyday, regular middle class, especially white people rights.
Well, again, as we've pointed out in the past, the charter was a bit of a fraud on the Canadian people. Section 15, subsection 1 says we all have equal rights now. And before the law, we're all equal individuals. Section 15, subsection 2 says, well, except for disadvantaged and marginalized groups, they
Well,
get
we're
put
all
ahead
equal,
of
except
this,
some are more equal than others.
which means it's not a principle, because a principle is a firm statement that everyone agrees on and adheres to. There's no excepts in a principle. Okay. And so that's why the Supreme Court has been able to make all these rulings it's made. That's why people can see whites being discriminated, white males being discriminated against, even in our military now, in our
Well, yeah,
hiring practice.
our DEI in Canada it permeates through everything. The only people
Yeah.
that you really see down in Maine and Hastings anymore are the white boys, because they can't get jobs anywhere,
So,
anywhere.
so when you see President
Maine
Trump
and Hastings is
issuing,
our drug corners. Sorry for anybody who doesn't know that.
when you
Famous
see
heroin corner.
President Trump issuing an executive order abolishing DEI hiring, for instance, okay, it would be impossible for him to do that under the Canadian Constitution, because it's in the Constitution that this discrimination is allowed. So he would first have to change the Canadian Constitution before issuing any orders of this type. That's that's just one example of major differences between the two
Unless, of
countries.
course, the Corporation of Canada dissolves, and then we are
Yes,
taken into the United States of America, and then that
yes,
that I guess pretty much negates our Constitution, doesn't it? Then.
yes. I have a feeling, though, that this discussion will die down in the fall when the Trudeau government is defeated. Whether it should die down is another question.
It
But the,
won't be
but the
able. It won't be able to, Gerry, because that's what this is going to
but
happen to us.
but the Canadian frustration is focused on Trudeau and removing Trudeau.
Yeah.
And when he's removed, there'll be such a sense of relief in the country that people will assume, okay, well, now things are going to get better, which isn't necessarily the case. But there'll be a period there, a respite, as it were, where Canadians will try and save their country from the damage that's been done by the traitorous government we've had now for several years, a government deliberately undermining our country. Now, President Trump, in a sense, if what he wants is Canada to join the United States, he should actually be congratulating Trudeau for all the fine work he's done in undermining and weakening Canada to make it possible for Canadians to even consider such an idea in the first place. Because without Trudeau, Trump would have been, honestly, 20 years ago, he'd have been laughed at for this suggestion. He'd have been mocked by Canadian comedians. Etc. People would have laughed. They would have laughed.
Well, I have to tell you, Gerry, if I could just take a moment, my dad is 92 in an old age home, and all he watches is CNN and MSNBC, no matter how hard I try to tell him it's fake news. He just doesn't really quite get it. But he doesn't like Trump, and he doesn't really know why. But now, I said, what do you think about that? And he said, don't talk about it. Because he's really Canadian. I mean, he's a hockey player.
Yes,
We're a really Canadian
yes,
family. We do have a Canadian
yes.
identity here, and it's heartbreaking. And I've had a few cries about it, because I really am a Canadian girl, even though I love the American spirit. I love the American Constitution. And interestingly enough, all of our conversations have been about how do we get the American Constitution here in Canada. So isn't that interesting, Gerry? Just like that,
Hmm.
Trump solved our problem. But let me finish here. I mean, it is truly heartbreaking. Canada has to hang on to some kind of identity. Maybe this will be the time when we stand up and say, yeah, we do have an identity, but we can bring that in with us. We can bring that in with us. It's just the problem is a lot of people really and truly don't realize, especially the left, the left here in Canada, which we mostly consist of which we mostly consist, is they're just so brainwashed. They don't get it that we're done. Like the United, when I told my dad got mad and I said, Dad, the United Nations and the Chinese Communist Party already own us. Like they already control us. Like we're already overtaken. We've already been defeated. We've already lost our sovereignty. We lost our sovereignty while all of you guys were watching CNN and MSNBC and CBC fake news,
And
taking
hockey.
jabs, killer jabs, right? There's no one to fight back because you guys are all dying of myocarditis, Dad. So no, it's really serious and we're done for. And thank God President Trump cares enough to try to save us. And I honestly believe that we'll have our identity, our Canadian identity, just like the Alabamans do, and the New
Hmm.
Yorkers do.
No, exactly. Yeah.
I just want to be protected under the American Constitution because that's what you and I have really been doing this for in the first place. We created Constitution Canada, that website and that idea because we knew it was all about our Constitution and that we were screwed because we had the worst Constitution on the planet and the United Nations took it over in 1982. So like that's what most Canadians have to realize is like you don't have any choice now. You were already taken over in 1982, if
Well,
not
and
prior.
you mentioned your dad, and I mean that kind of focuses on a danger here, and Canadians need to be really careful because what's going to happen in the next few months is Trudeau and the Liberal Party are going to try and mobilize people like your father, true patriotic Canadians, to save the country from the United States and President Trump rather than save us from
Well, if
communist
nothing
China
more, but
or
just
save us,
division.
and
Sorry,
rather
sorry,
than
Jerry. Can
save
I just
us.
jump in there? They want division and chaos no matter what. So whether they're winning or not, they're going to fight as they get. Even if we take them down, they're going to create chaos and division all the way down. So you're right.
Well, but this again, I mean, it's their last hope is mobilizing Canadian patriots and saying that those who aren't, of course, are should go live in the States. I mean, you already see
But
that
we
on
would
social
be
media.
if we were
If you like Trump so
American.
much, why don't you just move to the States? And and that's a real danger that Canadians can't get suckered into. What we need to do in this country, first of all, is replace our traitorous federal government and hopefully for something better. I'm not all that optimistic, but still anything at this point is better. Then we should have this discussion about the United States rather than let the Liberal Party make that the election discussion. Because what needs to be the election discussion is them being traitors to this country and the series of systematic steps they have taken to weaken and undermine this country. Not, they didn't realize Trump was going to pull this. This is being done for the international elites, the ones who don't like Trump. This is being done to preserve our resources for their future, not ours. Okay. And then they didn't realize, again, they're not the best chess players in the world because they didn't include the possibility of Trump getting reelected. They just assumed, no, he's done for. He's finished as a politician. So now he's been reelected and is a power figure, and he's interjected himself into this game. So now suddenly they're going to become Canadian patriots, our elites, and they've got to save Canada from this guy, even though they're the traitors themselves. And so it's going to be a real Orwellian show in this country where our elites are going to use Orwell as a handbook and call everything by its opposite name. And again, we need to warn the Canadian people not to fall for this. Just deal with getting rid of these guys and then discuss our future as a nation. Because right now we don't have a future as a nation with these guys running things. They're trying to make sure we
Well,
don't.
I know, and if I could just jump now again, the reason why you and I started End Race-Based Law 10, 11 years ago is because we knew it was an alarm bell, and it was really serious. It had already gone too far. No one had realized as they were going to work every day that all these court cases were going on across Canada, and all of these changes were being made, and all of our sovereignty was being undermined in court. So many
Mhm.
judges that are corrupt across Canada involved in this bullshit. The natives, they favor the natives across Canada because it's a big scam. The whole thing is a big scam from the United Nations. And these judges are
Well,
bought off, or they're Satanists, or they're pedophiles, one or the other,
or
right? But they're
or
corrupt.
they're lawyers, and the legal industry has literally made hundreds of millions of dollars out of
Yep.
race-based
They're
law
bought
in
off, they're
Canada.
corrupt.
And so lawyer judges set up a game for the legal firms, the legal corporations to cash in on. And they've been the ones going around to the tribes saying, you should be suing over this. We're collecting names for a class action lawsuit about residential schools. We're collecting names, a class action lawsuit about discrimination in healthcare. They're the instigators, and their fellow lawyers. We got to remember in Canada, lawyers, judges are just lawyers. And they're the most in lawyers, like they're the in crowd, which means if the legal profession is corrupt, they're in crowd of corruption. And now they get to be the judges who set up, because this Aboriginal game was set up by the courts. It didn't exist.
That is why we are called End Race-Based Law. Whenever the natives call us racist, it's like, I don't, how would really, really, do you really think in the end the United Nations care about you natives? They do not. They're just using you.
So, okay, a couple points now to consider from our perspective, then, okay, with this 51st state stuff. Number one, when the United States was formed, they explicitly stated that they no longer felt obligated to enforce any deals that the British had signed on their behalf. They were a new nation starting. They would make their own treaties and their own deals. They weren't going to be bound by what Britain had done before. Now, in Canada, we did the opposite. We formed a nation and we took on all of England's obligations. And England had started making the treaties already and had dictated that's what was supposed to happen, was make treaties with these people. And so our policy towards the Aboriginals has always continued the British approach. And we've said part of the reason we can't change stuff in Canada is because we inherited these obligations from the British. Well, the Americans already showed that you can just say, well, screw that. We're an
Well,
independent
they
country
didn't
now.
they didn't just show it, to be fair. They really fought hard, and lots of people died and a whole bunch of stuff.
Well, there's that. There's that too. And then there's the fact that after World War II, President Truman pushed for legislation in Congress to set a finalization on all of the treaty claims and all of the land negotiate, because this was going on in the States in courts too and costing them a lot of money. And so Congress passed legislation that gave them 5 years to submit any more treaty claims, any more bitches about the past and about injustices and wanting compensation. 5 years, and then there'd be no more allowed. Well, apparently they've found loopholes in that over time. But the general principle and approach of the states remains that, right? Like the past is the past. We're moving into the future. Canada is completely bound by the past. We can't move. And like when people say you can't reopen the Canadian Constitution because we just can't agree. Yeah, we're tied in knots. Like that Constitution ties us in knots for starters, and we can't agree how to untie the knots.
Well, it's really funny. Gerry and I have talked about this before because he does mostly Canadian politics and I do mostly American politics. And so it's really funny because the United Nations does have like Lakota Man on Twitter, who is like the woke DEI troublemaker on Twitter for the you stole our land people. But he's American, right? And it's
Yeah.
really funny. The Americans, because they have a completely different history, like you just said. So they're like,
Hmm.
shut up, you were conquered, right? Here in Canada,
Hmm.
it's a completely different dialogue. There's guilt and, we're sorry
Yes.
for our existence and all that kind of stuff. But in America, the
Yes.
Americans are like the natives who do even try to have a voice. It's just so few and nobody listens to them. Everybody's like, shut up, you were conquered.
Well, they don't, again, they don't have the constitutional and court authority backing them up, which in Canada makes them cocky now. Like you argue with an Aboriginal on social media in Canada, they say, well, your courts agree with us, not you. And so then you have to go into the long explanation of the courts and the corruption and the BS that they've created for their own
Oh,
legal
and the United
industry, et cetera.
Nations is behind them. The United
Yes.
Nations is behind them. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. We just suffered the most incredible abuse because they were just so emboldened. And so, yeah, it was like when they took over their native studies, it was the worst. It was propaganda. It was white hate is what it was.
So again, so let's say British Columbia wants to join the United States. Well, British Columbia has 205 so-called First Nations, 205, all with land rights, all with treaty negotiations ongoing, all with claims of injustice in the courts from the. So how does all of this, what happens to all of this then?
Well, what they're going to do is rob us blind. Like this is a big game. This is, they've played this game around the world in different countries, different ways, right? Whatever they can use for that. But this is a big game. It's not as if the natives are ever going to have better lives as a result of any of these court
Hmm.
cases, any of the
Hmm.
money that goes towards the lawyers and the chiefs. I mean, they're the ones that complain the most that the chiefs get the money. This is just, it's horrible. The whole thing is just so corrupt and so horrible. We need to literally wipe it out. And the best way to do that and start from scratch, I mean, one-time payouts. That's it, you're done. Join the crowd. We're all in this together. We're from everywhere around the world and
Yeah.
everybody makes it work except you natives. Come on.
Well, yeah, because the approach we're taking, it's just inevitable that it'll end up like New Zealand, where you now have Maori billionaires, but the average Maori person is living at the same level of poverty as they were 30 years ago. And so this route doesn't work,
Oh, it hasn't. And
which of course,
the regular native people are saying that. And we have a few minutes left here, Jared, before we wrap it up. Do you
mhm,
want to just go into we do some future news stories? We're going to try to do more postings in more videos in 2025 and talk about this issue because now this is going to be very interesting what happens if we are
yes.
taken over by the American Constitution.
And so, yes, just one more point about like British Columbia, for instance, to emphasize the point I was making. There is a band called the Fort MacLeod Band in northern British Columbia. They negotiated a quote new treaty with the government that gave them control over a whole bunch of land up there and the logging rights, etc., on a quite a large section of Crown land. This is about, I think, 5 years ago now. In the interim, they have apparently logged almost that entire area. The band members are the ones who brought it to public attention because they haven't seen a penny. They've watched their forests disappearing around them, and the chief set up their own company, logging company, and I'm sure cut a deal with one of the big companies because they couldn't have done that much
Oh
work
yeah, the
in
United
5 years.
Nations saw this. This was such an easy picking here.
Well, and see, the problem here is the BC government claims that these are co-management deals. But once the co-management deal is signed and the Aboriginals have their new treaty, they ignore the co part of it, and it's now our land, like it always was, and so we're going to do what we want. And the UN will back them because in UNDRIP, which the BC government is implementing UNDRIP in every aspect of BC legislation, in UNDRIP it specifically says the Aboriginals have the right to control their former territories, their traditional territories. They have the right to
Which was
control what
Siberia.
happens on
Which
them.
was
Okay.
Siberia.
Which means co-management goes against UNDRIP. The same piece of legislation the BC government is passing while they negotiate these so-called co-management deals
Oh my
with the
goodness, good point,
so-called
good
First
point,
Nations.
good point. Wow, Chair. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Thanks
it's
for bringing that up.
it's a level of fraud that only lawyers are clever enough to come up with.
Well, we don't want to end quoting what Shakespeare said, but we all know what Shakespeare said because we don't want to get taken off the air.
But yeah,
But Jerry, I
so
think we should
I
wrap this up.
okay. Well, I just point out I'm waiting on the BC government. It's a newly re-elected one to be to begin continuing their land giveaways from the previous term. And then I have a lengthy post which goes into all the background of how this has evolved in British Columbia over time and where the government's currently at. I'm sitting on it waiting for it to begin again now that the new government is back in. So when the legislature reconvenes, that's an upcoming post. I have numerous.
Check us out at endracebasedlaw.ca and endracebasedlaw.com. Gerry does the regular news stories on .ca and the bigger feature stories on .com. We wanted to separate the two. Okay, so Gerry, thank you
And
very much.
feel free to communicate with us about anything, any questions you have, any information that you'd like to know, anything we can do, we'll be glad to oblige.
Yeah, and in fact, we want to open up the floodgates and let you guys start talking about this Canada thing too. So we want to do some live streams if we can just get around to that, and actually have you guys live in the chat and asking questions. And if somebody wants to join us on Zoom, you can. So we really want to get this conversation going across Canada. How do you feel about Canada as the 51st state of the United States of America? All right, shall we wrap this up, Gerry? Say goodbye.
Yes. Okay, goodbye, folks. See you soon. Good luck to us all.
Yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in. This is a complicated subject here in Canada. A lot of people don't understand it. So this is what Gerry's an expert at this. Okay, go check out all of his millions of posts over the last 11 years. All right, everyone. Thank you very much. Cheerio. See you next time.